So, in our first video of the day, we had given a textbook definition of what economics is. And we said economics it's the social science that studies decisions that individuals, businesses, governments, and entire societies make as they deal with scarcity and the incentives that then influence and reconcile those decisions. I want to focus in on one key thing here as we talk about scarcity, and especially as scarcity relates to societies. So we say that scarcity exists within societies, like societies as a whole. But what exactly is it that is scarce for societies as a whole? What is it that's scarce? Well, we say that what is scarce for those society is resources. Okay, well, what are resources and what do we use resources for? Well, specifically, we use resources to make goods and services. So let's break this down a little bit more. What exactly are those scarce resources that we use in order to produce goods and services? We put these resources into four separate categories, and I'm always going to say them in this order: capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. So let me explain a little bit about these, and we'll use it in the example of a table. Let's say that I am building a table. All right. What do I need to make a table? Well, I need a lot of things. One of the things I need is like wood and screws and things like that. That is considered the land. Land is just all natural resources, all the resources that go into the final product itself. What becomes part of that table at the end? It's the wood, it's the screws, it's the nails, it's all those things. I one time read a textbook where it referred to land as the gifts of nature, and I thought that was way too poetic to leave out of a PowerPoint. So, land is just whatever becomes part of the product itself. It's the natural resources that go into it. Now, if I was just have a bunch of wood, have a bunch of screws, all that stuff, do I have a table? No, because I need stuff to put that table together. That stuff is what we refer to as capital. Capital is like the human made resources, like tools, drills, hammers, saws, those things that do not become an actual part of the table itself, but we use it in order to make the table. Maybe I have a table factory. Maybe I have these machineries that do it. Whatever tools, anything like that that help us put those natural resources together to make the product, that's the capital. Now, again, if I have tools and if I have wood, do I have a table? No. We need human element to that as well. One of the human elements of that is what we refer to as labor. You guys know what labor is. Labor is just the work time and the work effort that people put into producing goods and services. If I'm building a table, the labor is the blood, the sweat, and the tears that go into making that table, that go into sawing the wood, that go into screwing the screws in, and nailing the nails in, all those types of things. But what we see is there's a fourth element to this, and this is sometimes referred to as like the human capital element, and it's what we refer to as entrepreneurship. And if you guys like watch Shark Tank, they talk about the people on Shark Tank as being like entrepreneurs, right? An entrepreneur is just somebody who takes capital, takes land, takes labor, and they organize those resources in such a way that it produces a good and a service, right? Anyone who goes on Shark Tank, all they've done is they've taken capital, they've taken land, they've taken labor, and they've combined it in some way, some strategic way, in order to produce a good or a service that people want. And so entrepreneurship is a very important element. It's that business mind that goes into combining all the resources together to make stuff. Now, one thing I want to make very clear from the get-go: money's not a resource. Sometimes people think money is a resource. It's not. Money gives us access to resources. I can purchase capital or I can purchase land. However, it itself is not a resource, right? I can't turn money into a table, right? Like, I can't use money to cut wood, but that money gives us access to those other resources. So again, like I said, I'm always going to talk about these in order of capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. And these four together are known as resources. You will also hear me refer to these four as either the factors of production or as inputs. That's very important to keep in mind, because I'll use all three of those words: resources, factors of production, and inputs, interchangeably, because they really all mean the same thing. Factors of production, they're just the factors, the things we use in order to produce stuff, right? Or they're inputs, right? If you remember math, if any of you are math people, we talk about functions where we have an input and we have an output. Well, the input for a table is wood, screws, hammer, people, like to do labor, all that stuff. That's the input. The output is a table that comes out at the other end. But the reason I always say them in this order is because it gives us a really easy acronym to remember these, right? CELL, sell, capital, entrepreneurship, land, and labor. I think that's a really easy way to remember these four resources that go into all this. I think that's a great way to memorize it. That's the way you guys should go about it too. Now, what do we use these resources for? Well, we said we use it to make goods and services. But why do we need goods and services? What do we use goods and services for? Well, remember, back at the very beginning of all this, we talked about the idea that we have all of these wants and needs. And how do we satisfy those wants and needs? We satisfy them with goods and services. If I want a table to work on, like to do schoolwork, well, guess what? We need the resources in order to make that table. If I'm hungry and I want food or I need food, well, we need resources in order to make that food, okay? We need the resources in order to make goods and services. We use those goods and services then to satisfy people's wants and needs. So resources are just used to produce those goods and services. Now I just want to go through and define a few things really quickly. And you guys might already be aware of this, but like, what are goods and services? What's the difference between goods and services? I think a really easy way to explain it is that a service is something that is intangible. It's an intangible action or intangible activity, right? For example, if I get a haircut is a service. Now, do I have anything like a physically produced tangible object to show for that haircut? No, I actually have less than what I ended up with. They took away part of my hair, right? Like, so I have less than before. It's a service. It's intangible. It's not something you can hold, right? Or if I take a flight, if I take a flight, I have a paper ticket, but that paper ticket is not what took me from Indianapolis to California, right? It was the service of flying me from one place to another. It's an intangible action or activity. A good, on the other hand, is a physically tangible thing, physically produced, tangible object, right? Think about your cell phone. Your cell phone is a physical, tangible thing. It is a good. You think about a water bottle, physical, tangible thing. It's a good. But again, what do we use goods and services for? Well, we said we use them to satisfy our wants and needs. We have to differentiate between those things too. Want, remember, is not necessary for survival. A need is necessary for survival. We have to be careful here too, because there is kind of this gray area. Like, food is a need, pizza rolls is a want. Like, you get that difference there. Like, food as a whole is something you need to survive. I don't need pizza rolls to survive. I might want those, but those are not necessary for survival, okay? So just keep that in mind. Now, as we go through this, where does this all come together? So our economy is a system that determines which wants and needs will be satisfied. Because remember, we said that we want a whole ton of stuff, but we always want more than we can get. We don't have enough resources. Resources are scarce. We mentioned that before. Resources are scarce for societies, so therefore societies can't make enough things to satisfy everybody's wants and needs. So societies as a whole have to make decisions. Societies have to decide, okay, like, we have all these resources, but we have way more things that people want. So we gotta ask ourselves three questions as a society. We have to say, with these resources, what are we gonna produce? What are we gonna make with these resources? What goods and services? How are we gonna make them? And once we make them, who's gonna get them, right? These three questions and how these three questions are answered are what make up an economy. Really quick preview, you're going to see more of this in 1.4 when we talk about economic systems. Because how and who answers these three questions is what defines what an economy is. We see in the United States, these three questions are primarily answered by what we call the market, by the people, right? By you and me. The economy is a market system because what's going to be produced, how it's going to be produced, and who's getting it is decided by us, the people. Now, we're going to talk about how the people make those decisions more in 1.4 and then all of Unit 2. But in some countries, we see that the what, the how, and the for whom is determined by like a central planning, organization. We saw that in the Soviet Union, right? The central government, they decided what are we going to make, how are we making it, and who's getting it. That's called a command economy. And we're going to dive into more of that on day 1.4. And like I said, we'll talk more about this idea of how the people make these decisions as we get into unit number 2.